We all know that real estate has created more millionaires than any other industry on the planet. We also know that it has created a lot of heartache due to mismanagement, overborrowing, and just simple life events that happen to all of us. Welcome to the Cash Flow Pro podcast. My name is Casey Brown, and I am your fearless leader. And although we might be bourbon sipping and at times foul-mouthed Southerners, we will always do our best to be honest, straightforward, and due diligent with all of the information we pass along to you. Welcome to the show. Hey there, and welcome to today's episode of Cash Flow Pro, your daily real estate investing podcast and YouTube channel. I'm here today with Brian Bradley of BTB Legal, and he and I were just sitting here talking about how we can make this interesting and how we can dive into the world of trusts and how we can dive into the world of legal protections, asset protections, and all of the sort. And hopefully you could stick with us and get through it, because this is definitely knowledge that you're going to need to know. It may not be the sexiest of stories and like others in the past, but we need to know it. And this is the man to teach it to you. So Brian, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Casey, and thanks for having me on. And this is going to be an important topic. And I'm going to try to keep it fun and not legally dense. Maybe get some, like you said, like some sex appeal into like the legal talk. I don't know.
That's
Um,
right.
I'm not anyone's attorney. I'm not the legal guru here. Like I'm just good at what I do. And I just like talking about this in generalities. And I think that we're going to, really learn a lot from this topic. And I hope that the concepts that I break down help you and your listeners understand this area of law better and asset protection better, and even how to scale this as you go along and, like break down asset protection trust towards the end.
Yeah, and I think that considering that I think it's an episode before this, or maybe even a couple episodes before this. What I one gentleman specifically had went to prison because he had was, I guess, for lack of a better term, commingling funds amongst across different LLCs that he had investors in for with specific LLCs. And so
Yeah.
again, and what I don't want to happen is, and part of my podcast's appeal is the fact that we take stories and relate, but we relate it to people's real everyday lives. But the thing is that again, we're always either talking about the deal or we're talking about raising the money. We're not talking about, okay, what happens when shit goes awry, and now all of a sudden we're going, wait, I didn't aim for that to happen. I didn't aim for that company to go broke, but this company's not gone broke and whatever, right? All right. Well, then how the other part of this is, okay, so we're not talking about raising money, we're not talking about finding a deal, we're talking about, okay, how do we, when we find those two, how do we marry them and have the best relationship possible? And I think that's where you're gonna take us to, I hope so.
Exactly, and that's the game plan. And you're absolutely right. I think as investors, and you're focusing on financial freedom, getting out of the rat race, like all those great terminologies, hustling, finding deals, closing deals, raising capital. Um, no one plans on what happens when things go belly up, or there's a fire on the property, or mold issues, a deal falls apart, partners are suing each other. It's just like most people don't even plan on their estate plan for when they pass until it's, oh, grandpa's dying and he never created a will or a trust, because people don't think of mortality. It's not in the human brain network to
Yeah.
think we're ever going to die. And then people don't ever think about, well, we're good people and we're not trying to rip anybody off. So we're just going to do good old handshakes behind the back barn and hope that it holds up. And in today's world, that's not how life works out. For asset protection to work, which I'll even break down what that means in a minute, it has to be done beforehand, before you're getting sued. If you come to me afterwards, like saying, "Hey, Brian, like I'm getting sued. What can you do for me now?" Sorry,
Sorry.
buddy. Sorry, man. Like you're way too down that rabbit hole. I'm going to have to exclude it. This
Yeah.
needs to get set up beforehand. So you got to plan on this if you're starting to invest or go into businesses. Your biggest, offense is a good defense in this situation. And so I think, like a great way to maybe start is just kind of like, let's lay the land, and look at the landscape of, like, I think, like, why do we even care about asset protection? Like, I don't know, you think that's a good place to kind of start with this?
I think so. The other So for the passive investor, I really there's so many questions that I have, and again, the questions that I have may or may not necessarily be what's on the investor's mind. But the passive investor, and we all know that when a prosecutor or a plaintiff of a lawsuit step in and they say, okay, we're going to sue you, me, whatever. And they're going to attach everybody that they possibly can to this lawsuit, right? I mean, it just,
Yeah, I
that,
mean, generally they're just going for deep pockets, which is you, the person who owns the building. So you're the landlord, you're the deep pockets, you're Mister, white coat doctor who owns the building or whatever. At the end of the day, you're going to get sued and dragged into this. Maybe you're not even the person that caused the problem. Like I had a doctor as a client who's a California doctor who owned a property out in Jersey, right? Didn't know he rented it out to a gangbanger. They're having a party at this New Jersey property. Guns are pulled, a fight breaks out, someone's shot and killed. Who's getting sued for negligence and wrongful death? The doctor, California doctor, Mr. Deep Pockets. So you can be the greatest person in the world. It's just a matter of you can't control what you can't control, which is a lot of the negligence of your own life. Someone walking in front of your car and you hitting them. I've had a couple clients just a couple weeks ago. Fire broke out on their properties, 3 people dead, mold issues turned into massive, $1 million
needless to
claims.
say, when people get to you, there's already pretty well a story developed.
No, there is, but it's not even the story. It's just the fact that you're the person who owns that asset. So at the end of the day, the buck stops with you, and then you're going to be presumed, whether you are or not, you are going to be presumed to be Mister Deep Pockets.
Now, the bulk of who we are and my group, the my listeners, syndicators, capital
Hmm.
raisers, I feel a little bit like I'd like to start with maybe the LLC or the like you said, the start with the limited liability corporation
Yeah.
because basically we have a GP and an LP or a member and a
Gotcha.
manager, and the we have a set of operate we have an operating agreement that governs the company,
Hmm.
right? And
Yeah.
I guess part of an objection that we face regularly is investor comes to me and I've got a deal at 123 Main Street. Investor comes to me and says, "Hey, I want to be an LP or I want to be a member of that deal. Here's my 50 or 100K."
Hmm.
And then we go buy the deal and they're a member of that, right? They're
Correct.
assigned on. We've got a joinder agreement, whatever that particular case is. And they always say, okay, so exactly what you just said. We end up owning this building over here at 123 Main Street. He's a very investor's a very successful doctor out in California. He's worth millions, and gangbanger comes in. Everybody starts shooting everybody up. They sue 123 Main Street LLC, which I'm the manager of. He's a member of. What keeps is it state law or what keeps them from saying, "Hey, Casey Brown, the manager, doesn't have anything. He's got other debt, this, that, and the other. He's not worth going after. We need to go after all these other people because they're the people with the money."
Yeah. So it's a good question, and just remember, nothing's going to stop you from getting sued. Like it's just the
That's
reality
what
of
I'm
it.
saying. That's why I
Yeah.
say. That's why I say. We know that the tendencies of a prosecutor or the tendencies of a plaintiff's attorney on a lawsuit tend to just be like, "Hey, we'll throw everything against the wall. Whatever sticks, sticks. If it doesn't, then so be it." But there has to be some statute somewhere that keep the division there,
No,
right?
so what you're doing with asset protection is you're creating legal barriers between your assets like your rental property or your syndication deals and then that, plaintiff's attorney, the creditor that's suing you trying to take your money. And you
Mm,
set this stuff up before it's needed. So just think of, asset protection, whether it's like LLCs or limited partnerships, trust. Think of it just like a barrier, like a safe, okay, that you're going to put like your gold or your guns or valuables in. And then anything of value you're going to want to put behind that legal barrier and out of your personal name so that it's not easily attached with the lien or reach. So what
yeah,
you're doing is taking like title or ownership of that asset, taking it out of your name and placing it depending on what it is. Like if it's, actual hard land that you're the landlord on, then you're going to put it into its own LLC because it's risky, right?
yeah,
If it's a passive syndication deal where I'm a doctor and I gave you 100 grand for like 5% of this deal, Well, that's a passive investment. I can still get sued and lose that syndication investment of mine, because if I got sued personally or from the negligence of my life, well, they can take that, percentage of my equity that I own in that, to collect on for the judgment. So we would assign that out of having it in your personal name and into the name of like a holding company or a management company, like a limited partnership. So that doctor would have their own limited partnership as a management company that him and his
And that
spouse.
would be the investor.
Correct. And then that way, what they're doing is protecting their assets and their percentages that they own from their own negligence and their own life. Like the sponsor is going to have their own LLCs and their own limited partnerships and how they're, organizing funds and sponsoring deals. The investor needs to do the same thing to protect themselves from the negligence of their lives.
Yeah, and I've got to assume, you bring up the word negligence there for sure, and I've always been told. I say always. That's a broad way to put it, but at least I was told when I was in college, or possibly a little thereafter, that in order for no, maybe that was a different kind of a lawsuit. I was thinking you have to be able to prove negligence upon that party to determine that they were responsible. So, like, if the doctor says, "Hey, listen, I didn't have anything to do with that. I'm just a passive investor," obviously there has to be some precedent somewhere that's for that
Generally,
prosecutor
negligence is just presumed. Like, was it foreseeable from your actions? Like, were your
foreseeable.
actions, was there a foreseeability that the injury or whatever happened could have resulted from it? It's a very easy standard
Yeah,
to get from. It can be like with the game banker one. Like, okay, what was your due diligence in vetting through the people that you're renting your property to?
yeah,
Or someone gets sick or there's mold issues, and the family gets sick. Like, okay, like how many times, like, did you go in and do inspections on the units and the washing machines? And, like there's so many ways to sue somebody, and negligence is a very easy way. And the problem with lawsuits also, because people are like, oh, well, I have insurance, so I'm going to get covered by that, right? Well, no, not for big claims, because insurance wiggle room is saying, well, there's a potential intentional act
yeah.
involved with this. And there's always going to be a claim of intentional acts or wrongdoings in a big lawsuit, which can be as simple as saying you typed an email, click send. That action of clicking send and typing is an intentional act deemed by a judge. That now gives your insurance provider legal wiggle room to say, well, now there may be an intentional acts and intentional wrongdoings, and we don't cover you for intentional acts. So now we're not going to cover you for that $1 million
And you
lawsuit.
sue us and make us pay.
Correct. And if you think we're wrong, go ahead and sue us. So now you're getting sued while you have to go sue your insurance provider, and now you're fighting a double-edged sword
Yeah,
lawsuit. And that's unfortunately how the game is played. That's why asset protection is so important, because we want to nip this stuff in the butt right away. And so then to get to your question of kind of like LLCs, like we were chatting about, where these come into play and some of the misconceptions about them. I like LLCs. I use LLCs, but you got to think of asset protection as layers. All right. Like I come from the cold. I'm from Lake Tahoe. I lived in Michigan. We learned how to dress in different layers, right? Your first layer, very thin, sits on your skin.
yeah,
That's your LLC, base layer level entry, 101, asset protection 101. Remember the word limited liability company. They tell you straight up in the name, this is limited. It gives you some protection. It's going to vary from state by state, but this is where you start. Like generally, you're just starting to invest 0 to like 2 units, net worth 250,000 of unprotected equity or lower. LLCs and insurance, great place to start. Okay. The problem here is three things. Most LLCs are set up as disregarded entities, which means, it's good for taxes, it's passed through to you, but that risk passes through to you too. So if it's a disregarded LLC and a single member LLC and, like Casey's name, well, now if you get sued, just like those taxes pass through to you, so as all that legal risk and liability goes boom straight to you.
yeah,
And so what you want as you scale and you start adding more and more assets and your net worth grows, eventually you want those LLCs to flow into a second layer called a management company or a limited partnership,
yeah,
which will own those LLCs. All those K1s of, like, let's say you have 15 LLCs, all those K1s will flow into that limited partnership. So now you just have one tax filing. You're creating a second layer of protection. And now your life is starting to become easy to manage.
yeah.
So this is how you start scaling that. The other problem, there's two more big ones with LLCs, is you hear a lot of hoopla and arguing about like where do you set these dang things up at? You know, like do you go Wyoming,
Oh my
Delaware,
God.
Texas? Like you hear all this stuff, and realistically, you want to set your LLCs up in the state that you're going to get sued in, which means the state the asset's at. So if you're investing, I'm just going to say Tennessee because everybody's going to the Smoky Mountains right now.
Everything.
So I mean, like, yeah, I almost
I
50% of my
remember they
calls.
couldn't give those damn things away 12 years ago. Couldn't give
Yeah,
them away. They were
now
like,
it's
hey, book one night, we'll give you 10 free.
yeah, no, and now you I don't think like I wouldn't even almost want to invest there because like the cost that you're paying, the market's just accelerating so
Inflated, yeah.
fast. Yeah, I hear people can't even close because the cash offers are so high now. But anyways, that's a whole different topic of like actual investment strategies. But so let's just say we're going to Tennessee. It's going to be a Tennessee LLC because that's the state the asset's in. That's the state you're going to get sued through. It's going to be that state laws that apply. So if you took a Tennessee property and put it in a Wyoming LLC or a Delaware LLC or Nevada LLC, you can't buy another state's more beneficial laws and bring them to another state where there's no jurisdiction. That's not how our legal system works. And that's what you're hearing a lot of people say is, oh, well, I just created a Wyoming LLC and now I'm sticking all my property into there. And I don't live in Wyoming. I have no assets in Wyoming, but somehow they think they're going to get the benefit of that law from there because no one's explaining to them, like, sorry, you can't take the Wyoming law to a different state.
Well, I think that helps on the lawsuit side. Does it? Does it? I'm trying to think that. So a lawyer told me when I very first started in business was Delaware was the best because they had the most defined law. They had the oldest law. They were very business tax friendly.
Correct. And that's the distinction between real estate investing
Mm-hmm.
and you and I, like, hey, Casey, I have a great idea. Let's go create a widget company. We're going to go sell widgets. Well, now you and I have a business. You and I have a widget selling business. So when we create our operating agreements and our business operation and all of that, and then our business breaks down and we sue each other or we have to dissolve.
Yeah.
That's when Wyoming and Delaware and Nevada will work for us because our agreements that we made and hold in place for our actual business will be held up. Versus investing in real estate, it's not a business. We use them as holding company. It's the location, and then when you get sued through the real estate, you're generally getting sued through contracts of vendors or contractors. Those deals breaking up, so it's going to be those state laws that apply, or you're going to be getting sued through injuries in that state related to that property, which is where that property is located at. So there are different types of lawsuits. And that's what no one's really explaining to people is how you pick jurisdictional law that applies in different types of lawsuits. So real estate, you have to remember, it's just different. And then the other big one is this like fancy word people are falling in love with, anonymity. And people are like, oh, I'm going to go get an anonymous Wyoming LLC. And the thought is, well, now I can ghost a lawsuit. Yeah, I got served, but I don't exist. No one can ever find me. And I'm just not going to show up. Sorry, that's not how the legal system works again. Your Wyoming and Delaware, and out-of-state LLCs all have a personal agent of service. Their sole job is literally their sole job is to say, hey, boom, guess what? You just got served your documents. Here you go, Casey. Now go get a lawyer and get your butt into court. At that moment, anonymity no longer exists. Now you either show up or have a default judgment entered against you. And then once you're in court, you're going to be served what's called discovery. You're going to have to disclose the assets that you have in creditor disclosures. And then at that point, two things happen. You either lie under oath and say, I don't own anything, and then you commit perjury and go to jail, or you just have to disclose everything that you own because you're going through the litigation process. And so you're the weak link on anonymity. Anonymity exists so that it's a privacy mechanism. So I can't say like, hey, Casey, I hate you as a landlord. I'm going to go find your personal address and go egg your house. That's anonymity. Anonymity is not saying, now I'm going to ghost a lawsuit and I never am going to show up in court.
And see, and that's, and even when you start an LLC, even in a state and I can't say anonymity, it's, you have to have there has to be a registered agent, even in Kentucky. Correct. Like if you go so you still, can be served. Like, I think that registered agent can accept service for you, correct?
Well, that's their job. They will accept service for you, and then they give you the service. So once the
That's right.
service is accepted for you, you're now in a lawsuit. And then they're going to say, hey, here's your service. We accept it for you. If you don't have a registered agent of service in these states, then you don't have a legitimate LLC anyways. Now it's just personally you anyways that's going to be getting sued.
That's right.
Yeah, so you have to have those as part of like having the formalities of the LLC structure in place.
Yeah.
So that's why, remember, LLCs, no matter what type of LLC that you have, they're good. They're the base layer. You put risky assets in them, then it's where the layers scale and go from there into limited partnerships or management companies. And then you top it off with very, very strong asset protection trust. Generally, when you get around that like $1 million net worth mark, or like you're a high risk investor, like a doctor who's investing, or excuse me, you're a pure real estate investor, that's when the asset protection trusts come into play.
And that just creates another layer, right? Another.
Correct. And that's your strongest layer. The asset protection trust is your strongest layer. And then asset protection trust, it's like 31 flavors. There's tons of different types of trust. Not all trusts are the same. A lot of people will say, oh, well, I have an estate plan. I have a revocable living trust. That's not an asset protection trust. That's just there to avoid probate when you pass, and to say who your assets go to, name your beneficiaries, your medical directives, financial directives. It was a big game changer in the 60s because you got to avoid probate, having the court decide and the state decide who gets what and what they're going to do. You have more control over it. The difference between a revocable trust and an asset protection trust is that the asset protection trust protects your assets for you while you're living from people trying to sue you now. And that's what they are. So they're self-settled, meaning created for you, by you, as your own beneficiary. And then from there, you have different types of asset protection trusts. Most of them need to be irrevocable, not revocable. And then you can create them offshore, onshore, domestically, or do a hybrid. My firm, we specifically focus on the hybrid, which is combining the power of the offshore strength in the Cook Islands, and then we domesticate it through the IRS for tax purposes. And that way we have that strength in the back pocket. We don't have to do all the IRS disclosures and FACTA disclosures and all of that nightmare. But that way, if you ever do have a doomsday lawsuit, now you have the best of both worlds, the strength with the domestic ease and flexibility.
The Cook Islands, you mentioned that, and that's just recently become a title, or that's just recently become something that I've just learned about, and the stuff that you can do there was just unbelievable, really.
No, I mean, they're literally the strongest, most effective trust in the world. I prefer them if it's necessary and needed. And so my clients are all like high net worth, risky assets. I don't even go purely foreign. For like, I would say 99.8% of all my clients, we use a hybrid.
Now,
And the simple, what's
this
that?
is a very, very basic question, probably
Yeah.
almost a newbie question, but when I was a kid, all we ever heard about was Swiss bank accounts.
Yeah.
And the Swiss this, the Swiss that. And I'm assuming that the Cook Islands, is that something that's relatively new, or is it something that's always been there? It was just an alternative to
So the Cook Islands actually created asset protection trusts about 40 years ago in 1984. So they were the first. So we didn't have asset protection trusts until then. So the Cook Islands created their whole economy around creating self-settled spendthrift legislation. And then 10 years later, the US followed suit. Of all places, started in Alaska. So the benefit of the Cook Islands is this. Like if somebody wants to sue you, in your trust in the Cook Islands, they're going to have to start their case all over from scratch. Okay. The person suing you, they're going to have to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. So that's the murder standard, like the highest legal standard in the world, the 99% sure standard, not the 51% preponderance of the evidence. Like, I don't know, I'm not sure. Like, sure, let's just give it to them. If you get you can't get a contingency fee attorney to represent you in the Cook Islands because it's unethical there. It used to be unethical in the United States, but that got changed in the 60s. The claim, meaning the lawsuit, it's not amendable, meaning that once you file your complaint, that's it. You can't change it or amend it after the discovery process like you can do here in the United States. the person suing you is going to have to front the entire court cost and fly in a judge from New Zealand. And like one of the greatest benefits of it is if you lose, you pay. And so this is the one of the worst things that we don't have in the United States,
Yeah.
that the loser does not need to pay the legal fees and costs of the winner.
It
And
has to be
so
reported. It has to be reported in the contract. I learned that about a month ago in a lawsuit.
correct. And most of the time it's not,
Yeah.
and
Because you
yeah.
don't go
And
into a contract. Most people, I mean, who goes into a contract thinking, "Hey, yeah, I'm going to have to sue this person later on to make them perform," right?
the thing is, like when you're drafting contracts, you should always look at a contract and draft it from worst case scenarios, not just think about the best case scenario.
Sure.
Because if then something does blow up, you need to be able to have legal recourse.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's only a 1 year statute of limitations there. So you have all these amazing statutory hurdles, right? So that's what makes it the most effective trust in the world. The drawback, the negative, is they're very, very expensive. I mean, generally $40,000 to $70,000 to create, $12,000 a year to maintain. Tons of IRS disclosure, FACTA disclosures.
Well, I was going to say, I gotta think the IRS is going to be standing somewhere watching
Yeah.
what's going on.
Everything. You have to disclose every penny that's in there. All right. So that's where most
So
people
is
are
that
like,
where
nah,
your bank account is too?
no. So then you would create a Swiss bank account if you're going purely foreign, and then connect that to the Cook Islands. So you have the strongest banking system structure in the world connected to the strongest trust in the world, which then gives you the strongest, most effective asset protection structure there is. For most people on the planet, that's just overkill, right?
Yeah.
So then, yeah. So then you got the domestic side. So then 10 years later, the US was like, well, we can do this on our own, right? So now we have about 20 states that have some sort of self-settled spendthrift legislation, meaning asset protection statutes. Okay. Originally, it looked like it was going to work out. The problem is we have a constitution and we have the full faith and credit clause of this constitution, which means we can't run from legal judgments from other states. So if, like I'm a California resident and I get sued in Nevada, and then you have to, exercise that judgment, even though I'm in another state. Our legal system, you have to give other states full faith and credit of other states' judgments. Whereas the Cook Islands can literally just take that judgment, throw it in the trash, and say, we really don't care.
It doesn't exist.
That doesn't exist there, and there's nothing you can do about it. Okay. So what you started seeing in like the early 2000s was all the domestic asset protection trusts start failing, or judges ignoring the choice of law clause. Or like in California, there's a case, Kilker versus Steelman, that came down and said, hey, guess what? You're a California resident. We don't recognize asset protection trusts. So your Nevada asset protection trust you created doesn't work here. And so that's the problem of these domestic asset protection trusts is, yeah, they're cheaper, like 10 grand to set up. There's no IRS maintenance. But when you need them, like you're getting sued and you want them to work, they're not effective.
Yeah.
And so that brings down the hybrid that came about 30 years ago. My partner created it, called a bridge trust. And what it is, you're taking a Cook Islands trust, the strongest trust in the world, you're domesticating it through the IRS. So the IRS will now classify it as a domestic trust as long as you maintain a two-part test called the control test and the court test. It's like, too much legal mumbo jumbo for that.
Sure.
But you're just basically taking an offshore trust, domesticating it, which makes it cheaper to set up, cheaper to maintain, no IRS disclosures whatsoever because it's domesticated. And then, God forbid, you get in a doomsday lawsuit. Well, now I can remove you as the main trustee, break IRS compliance, and now you are what you are, a fully foreign trust. Wow. And so that's kind of the world of trust, from very, very strong to very weak to a really good one in the middle that gives you kind of the benefit of both.
Hi, this is Casey Brown, host of the Cash Flow Pro podcast and YouTube channel. Have you been thinking about investing in real estate but just don't know where to begin? I'd like to help by inviting you to check out our website at www.3000capital.com. There you will find an array of material that will help you learn all about real estate syndication. And while you're there, be sure to check out our free video series download titled 5 Must-Know Keys to Success in Passive Real Estate Investing. I'd also like to personally thank you for making Cash Flow Pro part of your day. Now, back to the show.
The benefit of both. And that's, and again, the thing is that as we step in, and I think the most valuable thing that at least my listeners could take away from this is what you referred to about limited liability companies and them, or limited liability corporations, whatever you want to call them, about keeping that very first word of that in mind at the forefront of your thoughts all the time. Limited. It gives you limited protection. And I guess my next question kind of comes into play where you have the LLC, you have a management company here, you have another LLC, and then people are members of, I'm trying to think where the structure, they'd be members of.
So the way the structure there would work would be you would have your LLCs that hold title of your real estate.
Yep.
And then instead of you being the managing member of the LLC, it would be your limited partnership.
That's
And
right.
then you would be the managing member of your limited partnership on the GP side. And then your trust would be the owner of the limited partnership on the other side of it. Because that's the benefit of using a limited partnership at that middle layer is, like, as a syndicator, limited partnerships have two types of ownership. They like a split personality. There's the GP side that manages everything and owns everything. And then there's the actual ownership portion on the LP side of that partnership. Instead of that being you, that should be your trust.
Now, real quick, I'd like for you to just touch on a couple of things there. So there's always the discussion, and it's like whether chicken or egg or whatever, but limited partnership or LLC. What is, and obviously they're I've been told several different things. You have more movability, or you can move around more with an LLC. Limited partnership is kind of the old way of doing it. I personally like the structure of a limited partnership myself a little bit better, just because it seems like it makes more sense to me.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the LLC, when I have an attorney that says, "Hey, no, I believe in this," I'm like, okay, yeah, that argument's right. So
Yeah, it depends on what it's being used for. So generally, you're going to put the title of actually like a building. Like, I'm going to go buy a rental property. I'm going to put the title into an LLC. I'm going to separate out that risk. You want to use a limited partnership as the management company because there's a lot of things that you can do statutorily with a limited partnership that you just cannot do with LLCs. And so just a few of these are, you have exclusive charging order protection with limited partnerships as the only remedy for creditors of the partners that you just can't get with all of LLCs. You have an actual statutory distinction between the GPs and the LPs. Okay. So by statute, that's better than an LLC because LLCs can only try to do this by an operating agreement that then is going to have to be in a lawsuit submitted to the court. And then that will be determined by the court for up to their interpretation. So you're basically letting a judge decide if he's going to agree with your operating agreement or not. That's very risky.
yeah,
And then, like, we use Arizona for limited partnerships because of a specific statute. It's 29-333. So it's the only state that allows you to do what's called a unilateral withdrawal on demand, which means if we're getting in a big lawsuit, my trust can now demand all the assets out of that management company and then statutorily disconnect from the limited partnership and legally have all the assets.
wow.
And so so I mean, just that alone is like an amazing strength and power to have, which you just can't get from an LLC by statute. And then you can
recognizable in other states.
Yeah.
I mean,
and the thing is, like, you can try to recreate this with LLCs through, like, again, the operating agreements, but you can't do that without exposing yourself through the LLCs from a claim of fraudulent transfer. So you're going to now have to fight a fraud claim if you're doing this through an LLC. But if I'm doing it through a limited partnership, they're statutorily allowed to do that.
Yeah.
So just those are good, right? And then, limited partnerships, they're perpetual. So whereas LLCs, every year you have to redo the filing for the LLCs and reporting for every year. You don't have to list the GP, the general partners. You only have to do the LP side. So by nature, limited partners they're completely private. So you have that privacy mechanism already statutorily built in. And then just remember, tax filing purposes, right? Your limited partnership cannot be a disregarded entity. But LLCs, which is one member, they're automatically considered a disregarded entity. And again, like we mentioned before, that's just not good for, lawsuits.
That's right. That's right. So awesome. Listen, that is deep, and I hope everybody got something from that. If it's just one little nugget that helps you get your protection in place and figure out what the best structure is for you, for your company, for your syndication, for your capital raising, for whatever. If not, my man here is going to give you a way to get in touch with him here in just a few minutes. But first of all, Brian, we ask everybody the same two questions that comes on the show. The first of those questions is, what is the best book that you have recently read or are currently reading?
Oh, yeah. So the best one, like I always go back and read. I love the book The Alchemist.
Yeah,
So I try to read it every year because it's a great book. Quick read, kind of centers you, works on mind, body, soul, identifying your purpose in the world. It doesn't always have to be about money and financing. Like you got to work on your inner self.
sure. All right. Next question. What is a dream vacation that you have either taken or hope to take?
Oh man, like I've traveled the world, so I've gone to a lot of fun places. So I always like going back to Maui. It's a great place. So I'm going to be heading there in a couple of weeks with my daughters, and so
Awesome.
I would say Maui is great, and Belize, can't go wrong with either one.
Awesome, man. Both. Obviously, Hawaii is like if I had one main place that everybody answers that question with, it's Hawaii to some degree or another. So, all right, awesome. All right, now tell the listeners, how can they reach out and get in touch with you? Excuse me, if they have a question or want to get legal advice or even potentially hire you for something they've got coming or going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Just jump on my website, www.btblegal.com. I have it set up as an educational website with a lot of case law, case studies, educational links. Because I just want you to be prepared and be able to know the law, know some case law, know some statutes, know real life situations. So when you shop around, you know when you're getting smoke blown up the back end or not. And it's going to make you more prepared to talk to lawyers and ask questions. Or you can just email me, Brian, Brian at btblegal.com. I do a free 1 hour consultation, like whether we work together or not, or we're a good fit or not. I'd rather you just have like a good breakdown, take it, shop it around, and then, at least have something solid and tangible to think about.
Sure. Awesome. And listeners, thank you so much for taking the time today to listen to the show. And hopefully, again, you got something from it that Brian shared. And if not, there you go. He gave you the way to get in touch with him. And Brian, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show today. We really appreciate it. Listeners, last thing, as always, please, please, please head down and leave us a 5-star review and also type a review so that others may know what you like about the show. And last but not least, please smash that subscribe button because we would love for you to be a subscriber. We'd love for you to keep coming back and keep getting more information and listening to the Cash Flow Pro. Again, thank you for listening today. And Brian, thank you again for being on the show. I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of the day.
Cash Flow Pro is hosted by Casey Brown, founder and CEO of 3000 Capital, a commercial real estate investment firm committed to providing its investors with ongoing cash flow and helping them build long-term wealth. If you enjoyed today's podcast, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you'll be notified about all our future episodes. You can find more information about us and our investment philosophy by clicking the link in the show notes below. Thanks for listening.